Before there were legends of treasure or secret bloodlines, there were only 9 men on a dusty road to Jerusalem. Their story would reach across 1,000 years of faith, power, and the silence that follows both. This is the entire history of the Knights Templar. In the early 12th century, Europe was rebuilding itself after long centuries of division. Fields that had once been battlegrounds were being plowed again. Small stone churches rose beside wooden villages, and trade routes slowly reopened between distant kingdoms. The power of the church was growing stronger than that of most rulers, binding together lands that shared little except faith. The First Crusade, launched in 1095, had captured Jerusalem for years later. Tens of thousands of soldiers and pilgrims had marched across the eastern Mediterranean, driven by devotion, opportunity, and command from the Pope. When the city fell, a fragile Christian kingdom appeared among peoples who had lived there for centuries under Islam. It was a hard and uncertain conquest. When the fighting ended, many returned home believing they had fulfilled their vows. But others stayed. They saw how vulnerable the new settlers were and how dangerous the roads remained. Pilgrims arriving at the ports of Jaffa or Acre often faced robbery or worse before reaching Jerusalem. To travel was an act of faith and risk. Among those who chose to remain was a knight named Hugues de Payens, a vassal of the Count of Champagne. He and a small circle of companions proposed an unusual idea: knights who would live under monastic discipline while protecting travelers. Their vision joined the courage of a soldier with the restraint of a monk. In 1119 they formally took vows before the Patriarch of Jerusalem. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. King Baldwin II granted them quarters in a wing of his palace that stood on the ancient Temple Mount. From that setting, the site linked to Solomon in Scripture, their shorter name emerged, the Knights Templar. At the start, they owned almost nothing. 9 men, a few horses, and hand-me-down armor. Their lives followed a strict pattern: prayer at dawn, patrol by day, rest by nightfall. They ate together, slept in shared quarters, and took turns standing guard over the roads to the Holy City. Theirs was a quiet, disciplined existence. For several years they went largely unnoticed. Then word of their devotion reached Europe, where reformers inside the church were promoting new monastic ideals. The Cistercian order, led by Bernard of Clairvaux, saw in these knights a living example of spiritual renewal. Bernard argued that they combined contemplation with service and that such unity could purify the violence of war. In 1129 a church council at Troyes recognized the group officially. Bernard helped draft their rule of life, blending monastic customs with military discipline. He described them as men who lived together without property, without families, and without fear. That endorsement gave the Templars legitimacy and prestige. The papacy soon extended privileges. Templars were placed under direct authority of the Pope, exempt from local taxes and interference. They could build their own chapels, keep their own priests, and move freely across borders. This independence would make them invaluable to rulers who needed reliable agents, and troublesome to those who envied their freedom. Across Europe, wealthy patrons donated land or rents to support the cause. Commanderies sprang up from Portugal to Poland. Each one functioned as both farm and fortress, crops were grown to feed the brothers, horses bred for the East, and revenues collected for shipment to the Holy Land. Over time, these estates created an economic network that stretched further than any secular power of the age. Training was constant. Knights drilled with lances and swords, sergeants maintained armor and guarded gates. Every brother followed the same schedule: matins before sunrise, mass, a simple meal, then work or patrol duty. Silence at meals reminded them of their vows. The rule even governed small habits: how to mount a horse, when to speak, and what clothing was allowed. The order's banner, called the bossant, was half black and half white, colors meant to show the contrast between the world of sin and the purity of their cause. Their seal displayed two riders on a single horse, a symbol of humility and brotherhood. Each knight wore a white mantle marked with a red cross, a sign of service rather than conquest. As the Crusade estates matured, the Templars built fortresses at key crossings: Bargras in Syria, Gaza on the coast, and the great castle of Safed in Galilee. These strongholds protected supply routes and served as refuge for pilgrims. Their architecture was plain but advanced, using concentric walls, inner courtyards, and towers suited to the new siege engines of the age. In Europe, their role broadened beyond warfare. Because they were trusted and literate, Templars became guardians of documents and funds. Merchants and nobles deposited wealth in Templar houses, receiving written orders of credit redeemable elsewhere. It was a practical solution to the danger of carrying coins across unstable lands. Modern banking traces part of its method to these transactions. Their neutrality made them useful to kings. The English crown borrowed heavily from them. French monarchs used their Paris temple as a treasury. They handled correspondence for the papacy and escorted envoys between courts. The order's headquarters in Jerusalem communicated with Europe through its own fleet of ships. Few organizations of the time managed information and resources with such precision. Despite success, life inside remained austere. Meat was served only a few times a week, personal conversation was limited, entertainment was banned. Obedience defined their identity. A brother who disobeyed command risked penance or expulsion. The system kept order but allowed little individuality. Through the middle of the 12th century, the Templars grew into an elite corps of professional soldiers. When battles came, they fought in tight formations with discipline unusual for the age. Accounts describe them holding ground until completely surrounded, refusing to flee unless ordered. Such conduct earned both admiration and fear. To the wider Christian world, they embodied stability. Amid shifting alliances and frequent crusading failures, the white-cloaked knights appeared constant. They became symbols of faith put into action, living proof that dedication could build order out of chaos. By 1160, the order's reach extended from Scotland to the deserts of Arabia. Its houses served as hostels, banks, supply depots, and places of prayer. Young men of noble birth sought admission not for fortune but for purpose in a world of uncertainty. The Templars could not know that within 2 centuries, suspicion and envy would undo everything they had built. For now, they stood at the height of honor, respected, feared, and trusted. Their story had only just begun. By the middle of the 12th century, the Knights Templar had become one of the most organized institutions in the medieval world. Their presence stretched from the vineyards of France to the ports of Acre and Tyre. In Europe, their commanderies managed harvests, collected rents, and trained new brothers. In the East, they guarded castles that formed a chain of defense across the Holy Land. Each region had its hierarchy. At the top stood the Grand Master, elected for life by senior brothers. Beneath him were provincial masters who supervised finances and logistics. Every local house kept detailed records, charters, lists of property, and inventories of weapons. Few secular governments matched that level of administration. The Order's influence was visible not only in war but in diplomacy. Templar envoys carried letters between popes and kings. Their reputation for honesty made them trusted witnesses in treaties. When disputes arose among nobles, a Templar commander might be invited to mediate, his neutrality accepted by all sides. In the Holy Land, however, politics were unstable. After decades of uneasy peace, Muslim forces under Zengi and later Nur ad-Din began to unite Syria and Mesopotamia. The fragile Christian states depended increasingly on military orders to hold the frontiers. The Templars, joined by the Hospitallers, manned key fortresses such as Gaza, Safed, and the great coastal city of Ascalon. Their discipline impressed allies but sometimes angered secular lords. Templar commanders refused to yield castles without papal approval, even when local kings demanded it. Their loyalty to Rome protected them from corruption yet isolated them from the politics of the realm they defended. In 1147 the Second Crusade brought a new wave of European armies to the east. The Templars guided them through unfamiliar terrain, providing scouts and interpreters. Despite good intentions, the campaign ended poorly, but the Order's reputation emerged intact. Their reliability in retreat impressed observers more than others' enthusiasm in attack. During these decades, the Templars' architecture reached its most sophisticated form. Their castles were designed as systems of defense, outer walls, inner keeps, cisterns for water, and hidden passageways. At Tortosa and Chastel Blanc, archaeologists still trace the geometry of their planning, everything measured for efficiency rather than display. Inside, chapels faced east, barracks lined the courtyards, and storerooms held grain for long sieges. In Europe, the flow of wealth continued. Donations came not only from nobles but from townspeople who believed that gifts to the Order could shorten penance in the afterlife. Templar estates produced wool, wine, and iron. Their surplus financed campaigns overseas. By some estimates, the Order controlled thousands of properties, all linked by a system of accounting that kept track of every coin and crop. The combination of wealth and secrecy began to draw attention. Outsiders wondered what ceremonies took place behind closed doors. Initiation rites were private, and even the wording of oaths was kept within the Brotherhood. Most likely they were simple promises of obedience, but in a superstitious age, rumor filled the gaps. Still, the Templars' record in battle kept public opinion favorable. Chroniclers describe them charging in tight formation, their banner held high until the last man fell. Muslim historians, too, respected their courage, calling them disciplined and fearless. War, however, was constant, and losses were heavy. Few knights served more than a decade before death or injury. The greatest trial came in 1187. A new leader had risen in Egypt and Syria, Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin. He united rival Muslim factions and prepared to retake Jerusalem. That summer his forces met the Crusader army near the Horns of Hattin, above the Sea of Galilee. The battle was decisive. The Christians, exhausted by heat and thirst, were surrounded. Many fell, many more were captured. Among the prisoners were dozens of Templars. According to sources of the time, Saladin offered them a choice: conversion or death. They refused, and most were executed. 3 months later, Jerusalem surrendered. For the Templars, the loss of the Holy City was both a tragedy and a turning point. Their headquarters moved to the coastal city of Acre, where new fortifications rose beside the harbor. From there they would continue their mission for another century, fighting, negotiating, and rebuilding. In Europe, news of the disaster shocked rulers and faithful alike. The fall of Jerusalem inspired the Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. The Templars served as guides and quartermasters, organizing supply lines and maintaining discipline among restless armies. Their experience kept the Crusaders from greater losses, though Jerusalem itself was never regained. The years that followed tested the order's endurance. Acre became their new capital, and from its massive stone walls they controlled trade between east and west. Within the city, their compound included workshops, stables, chapels, and one of the strongest towers in the region. Visitors described the complex as a fortress within a fortress. Back in Europe, the Templars' economic system reached its peak. They managed royal debts, funded construction of cathedrals, and even minted coins under papal license. A noble might join the order not as a warrior but as a donor, securing spiritual favor and safe management of property. For many families, the temple functioned like a trusted estate office. Despite outward success, strain was growing. The Holy Land could not be held indefinitely. Muslim powers learned to counter the tactics of the Crusader states, while European enthusiasm waned. The cost of defending distant outposts drained resources faster than they could be replaced. Yet the Templars continued, bound by oath and habit to the cause of Jerusalem, even after Jerusalem was gone. In these years legends began to form, quietly at first, told by pilgrims returning home. Some said the knights had discovered relics beneath the Temple Mount, sacred vessels, perhaps the Holy Grail itself. Others claimed they possessed ancient knowledge passed down from Solomon's priests. No evidence supported such tales, but they spread because mystery always fills silence. By the end of the 12th century the Templars stood between two worlds. In the east, they were soldiers defending shrinking frontiers. In the west, they were financiers and landlords integrated into everyday life. Few could see how difficult that balance would become. When the century turned, their order was strong in numbers, disciplined in command, and rich in possessions. Yet beneath the surface, the mission that had defined them was beginning to blur. The holy city they had sworn to protect was no longer theirs, and Europe's attention was drifting to its own rivalries. The next century would reveal how fragile power could be, even when built on faith and iron. The 13th century opened with the Knights Templar at the height of their wealth and organization. They were no longer a handful of men in a distant land but a global network bound by one rule and one purpose. Their banner still flew over castles in the Holy Land, yet their heart had quietly shifted westward. From their new headquarters at Acre, the brothers managed the defense of remaining Crusader territories. The city, built on a narrow peninsula, had become the capital of what little remained of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Its harbor was crowded with ships bringing supplies and pilgrims from Europe, many of whom would never reach the front lines. The Templars maintained their own docks, warehouses, and workshops within its walls. Their fortress at Acre was a marvel of medieval engineering. Contemporary visitors described massive halls supported by stone vaults, lined with storerooms and barracks. The central tower rose above the city's skyline, both symbol and refuge. Beneath the complex ran tunnels leading to the sea, built as escape routes or supply channels during siege. Everything was designed for survival. Despite losses, the order continued to attract recruits. Young nobles saw service in the temple as both spiritual calling and career. The vows remained strict: obedience to command, chastity, communal life, and no private property. Each new knight gave his worldly goods to the order and received in return only what he needed to live and fight. Their system depended on constant communication. Messengers crossed the Mediterranean carrying letters, reports, and coded lists of accounts. Convoys of ships, guarded and provisioned by the brothers, sailed between Marseille, Genoa, and Acre. The efficiency with which they moved resources astonished contemporary rulers, many of whom struggled to manage their own realms. In Europe, the Templars' estates formed a parallel economy. They leased land to tenants, collected tithes, and processed wool and grain for export. Each commandery sent a portion of its income to the east, a practice known as responsions. This steady stream of revenue kept the armies of the cross supplied long after popular enthusiasm for crusading had waned. For ordinary people, the sight of a Templar house was reassuring. Their walls were thick, their gates guarded, and within their precincts merchants could store valuables or rest on long journeys. In some towns they even operated mills or bridges, charging modest tolls to fund their duties abroad. Relations with other military orders were complex. The Templars and the Hospitallers often fought side by side, yet rivalry for influence and donations was constant. Both orders answered only to the Pope, and both guarded their autonomy fiercely. When disputes arose, mediators from Rome were sometimes required to restore peace between them. By the 1220s, a new challenge had emerged. The Crusader states, already weakened, faced internal divisions as well as external threats. Disputes between local barons and European rulers distracted attention from defense. The Templars found themselves drawn into politics they wished to avoid, supporting one faction or another in the name of stability. In 1244, Jerusalem fell again, this time permanently. The city was sacked by Khwarezmian mercenaries allied with Egyptian forces. Templar and Hospitaller contingents fought to defend the Holy Sepulchre but were overwhelmed. Afterward, the city remained closed to Christian pilgrims for generations. The loss intensified the order's focus on defense of the coast. They strengthened fortresses like Atlit, known as Chateau Pellerin, one of the largest castles ever built in the Levant. With walls 12 meters thick and towers facing the sea, it symbolized both faith and fatigue, a fortress waiting for a war that might never end. Templar ships patrolled the eastern Mediterranean, escorting supply fleets and pilgrims. Some served as transports for crusading armies from Europe. Others carried grain, oil, and wine to support the settlements. Their maritime experience eventually made them one of the most capable naval forces of the age. At the same time, their European role continued to evolve. Monarchs used Templar treasuries as state banks. In Paris, the Temple compound became the financial center of the French kingdom, holding deposits for the crown and for private clients. The English exchequer kept its surplus funds in Templar custody, trusting their reliability more than that of local officials. Such influence carried risk. The brothers themselves lived simply, but their institution handled immense wealth. To common people, it was difficult to reconcile vows of poverty with visible prosperity. Rumors began to circulate, some admiring, some suspicious, that the Templars had secret sources of power. Through these years, the papacy continued to rely on them as military advisors and financiers. Popes granted them new privileges in return for loans or services. But with every privilege came resentment from bishops and kings who saw their authority bypassed. Few dared challenge them openly, yet unease was spreading. Meanwhile, beyond the Levant, a new danger appeared. From the east, Mongol armies swept across Asia, reaching as far as Syria. For a brief moment the Crusader states considered alliance with them against common enemies, and Templar envoys traveled east to negotiate. But geography and distrust ended such hopes quickly. The last great test came in 1291, when Acre itself fell. The city had resisted siege for weeks under relentless attack by Mamluk forces. The Templars fought house to house until their fortress collapsed around them. The Grand Master, Guillaume de Bujuju, was mortally wounded defending the gate. Survivors fled by sea to Cyprus, carrying what relics and records they could save. With that loss, the Crusader era effectively ended. The Templars' mission, protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land, was gone. On Cyprus they built new headquarters and waited for another crusade that never came. Europe had changed. Kings now looked inward, focusing on their own territories and rivalries. The age of religious wars overseas was closing. Without the Holy Land, the Templars' purpose became uncertain. They remained wealthy, disciplined, and respected, but their usefulness diminished. In an era of growing nationalism, an independent order answering only to the Pope seemed out of place. Suspicion turned slowly into hostility. On the island of Cyprus, the brothers continued their routines. They trained, repaired armor, and held councils, still hoping that Europe would raise new armies for the East. Decades passed, and no crusade came. The network they had built across the continent remained intact, but it no longer had a central mission. The world that had created them, faith united by a single cause, was dissolving. Feudal society was giving way to stronger monarchies. France and England were growing powerful, and both relied on money borrowed from the temple. Debt breeds dependence, and dependence often turns to resentment. By the end of the century, the Templars were both admired and envied. They were trusted with treasures but distrusted for secrecy. Their fortresses were symbols of faith, yet also of independence from royal command. When Philip IV of France began to look for ways to strengthen his crown's finances, the order's wealth stood clearly in his view. The stage was quietly set for what would follow. The Templars, who had risen from 9 poor knights to masters of an empire of stone and parchment, were about to face their most dangerous enemy, not an army, but suspicion itself. When the 13th century ended, the Knights Templar still appeared strong. They held castles across Europe, their treasuries were full, and their discipline seemed intact. But beneath the surface, the world had changed. The crusading movement that had given them purpose was over, and the politics of Europe were ruled not by faith but by crowns. The most powerful of those crowns belonged to Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. He was intelligent, ambitious, and deeply in debt to the Templars. His wars with England and Flanders had drained the treasury, and his conflicts with the papacy had weakened his moral authority. For a king seeking control, the order's independence was intolerable. At the start of the 14th century, the Templars were led by Jacques de Molay, a veteran knight who had served in the East and become Grand Master in 1292. He was respected for integrity but lacked political skill. De Molay hoped to reorganize the order's mission, perhaps merging with the Hospitallers to form a single force for future crusades. In 1306 he traveled to France to meet the king and discuss these plans. What he found instead was suspicion. Philip's advisors had begun compiling accusations against the Templars. They claimed that in secret initiation ceremonies the brothers denied Christ, spat on the cross, and worshipped idols. The charges were sensational, designed to shock and justify seizure of the order's property. Rumors spread quickly through Paris, whispered by officials eager to please the crown. On Friday, October 13, 1307, the king acted. At dawn, royal agents arrested every Templar in France. Hundreds of brothers were seized in their commanderies, their goods inventoried, their papers confiscated. The date would later give rise to superstition about Unlucky Fridays, though at the time it marked the beginning of one of history's most famous trials. Interrogations began immediately. Under torture, many confessed to the charges, hoping to end their suffering. Some later recanted, insisting they had lied under duress. Others died in prison before any verdict could be reached. The king presented these confessions as proof of guilt and pressed the papacy to dissolve the order. Pope Clement V, then residing in Avignon, faced an impossible situation. He owed his position partly to Philip's support and feared confrontation with France. At first he protested the arrests as a violation of church authority. But as the testimony multiplied, he agreed to open a papal inquiry. The process dragged on for years. Across Europe, reactions varied. In England and Iberia, kings hesitated to move against the order until pressured by the Pope. Some Templars were briefly detained and questioned but later released. Only in France did the campaign reach its full severity. The royal treasury absorbed Templar assets, their Paris headquarters was emptied and sealed. In 1310, a council convened to decide the fate of the brothers. Dozens who tried to defend the order publicly were declared relapsed heretics and executed. The trials increasingly resembled political theater rather than investigation. By then the outcome was clear: the king intended the order's destruction. At last, in 1312, the Council of Vienne formally dissolved the Knights Templar. Pope Clement, seeking compromise, transferred most of their property to the Hospitallers. In practice, however, much of the wealth stayed in royal hands. The once powerful brotherhood that had guarded the roads to Jerusalem ceased to exist. 2 years later, Jacques de Molay and other senior leaders were brought from prison for final judgment. When the sentence of life imprisonment was read, they astonished the crowd by declaring their innocence. They withdrew every confession made under torture and proclaimed the purity of their order. Philip ordered immediate execution. On March 18, 1314, de Molay and Geoffroy de Charny were burned at the stake on an island in the Seine, within sight of Notre Dame Cathedral. Witnesses recorded that de Molay prayed aloud and called on God to judge both the king and the pope before the year's end. According to chroniclers, both men indeed died within months, a coincidence that gave rise to tales of a dying curse. The fall of the Templars left a deep mark on European imagination. An order that had stood for discipline and faith was erased by rumor and politics. Their estates passed to others, their fortresses were absorbed into local domains, their name became legend. In the following decades, stories spread that some brothers had escaped with secret treasure, sailing west or hiding in remote valleys. None were ever proven, but the mystery endured. In Portugal, surviving knights were reorganized under a new name, the Order of Christ. They continued charitable and military work and would later sponsor voyages that opened the age of discovery. Thus, in altered form, the Templar spirit lived on, shaping exploration rather than crusade. Elsewhere, the memory of the temple inspired writers and secret societies. Renaissance thinkers reimagined them as guardians of hidden wisdom. By the 17th century, Masonic traditions claimed symbolic descent from the Templars, linking the Red Cross to new ideals of honor and reason. Though such links were imaginative rather than historical, they kept the name alive. Historians of later centuries would see the suppression as part of a larger shift from medieval to modern authority. Kings were asserting control over church institutions, and the papacy was losing its command over politics. The Templars, standing outside both systems, became casualties of transition. Yet their memory survived because it embodied contradictions that fascinated every age: faith and wealth, obedience and independence, heroism and secrecy. Each generation projected its own fears and hopes onto their story. To some they were saints, to others, conspirators. The absence of certainty ensured their immortality. Long after the flames of 1314 died, chroniclers continued to write of the last Grand Master's courage. Ballads and plays turned him into a symbol of integrity betrayed. The phrase Templar treasure entered languages as shorthand for secrets lost to time. And though the order was gone, its red cross appeared again in art, architecture, and imagination, connecting the present to a vanished world. From a practical point of view, their real legacy lay in what they built. They advanced methods of administration and credit that would shape European finance. They influenced military architecture and the concept of disciplined, professional armies. Even their rules of conduct, honor, service, and collective purpose continued to echo in later chivalric orders. By the time the 14th century closed, the once feared brotherhood had become a memory half sanctified, half condemned. And yet, across the centuries, the world never stopped wondering what truths might still lie buried beneath the stones of their temples. When the fires of 1314 faded, the Templars were officially gone. Yet their absence seemed to magnify their presence. Chroniclers who had barely noticed them in life now wrote endlessly about their fall. The combination of faith, secrecy, and sudden destruction was too powerful for the imagination to forget. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe moved on. New orders took their place in charity and war. The Hospitallers held the island of Rhodes, then Malta. The Teutonic Knights built a monastic state along the Baltic. But none acquired the same aura of mystery. Stories of surviving Templars began almost immediately. In France and Italy, people whispered of brothers who had fled with treasure before the arrests. In Scotland, legend claimed that exiled knights fought beside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn in 1314, turning the tide of battle. No document confirms it, but the tale endured because it offered justice to men believed wronged. Meanwhile, the church absorbed their properties. Monasteries took over estates, cathedrals inherited donations once marked with the Red Cross. Over time, the name Temple clung to the sites they had occupied: Temple Brewer in England, La Villedieu in France, Tomar in Portugal. Each became a fragment of a memory network scattered across Europe. In Portugal, the transformation was most complete. The new Order of Christ, sanctioned by the Pope in 1319, kept many of the old members and much of their property. 2 centuries later, its cross decorated the sails of ships that carried Portuguese explorers down the coast of Africa and across the Atlantic. The symbol that had once guarded pilgrims now marked the beginning of global navigation. Elsewhere, their reputation changed with the times. In late medieval chronicles, they appeared as martyrs of injustice. In Renaissance writings, they became seekers of hidden knowledge. Alchemists, mystics, and poets all claimed fragments of their legend. The lack of surviving records invited speculation, and speculation easily became myth. During the Reformation, when old religious orders were questioned or dissolved, the Templars' story took on new meaning. Protestants viewed them as victims of papal corruption, Catholics saw in them a warning against pride and independence. Each side reshaped the tale to mirror its own fears and ideals. By the 17th century, European scholars had begun to study medieval documents systematically. Some attempted to separate history from legend, editing early rules and chronicles. Yet even as facts were clarified, romantic imagination kept pace. Playwrights portrayed ghostly Templars guarding secret vaults, painters dressed them as tragic heroes, philosophers used them as symbols of reason persecuted by ignorance. Freemasonry emerged around the same time. Though it had no direct link to the medieval order, Masonic lodges adopted Templar imagery, crosses, swords, and initiation rituals echoing vows of honor and secrecy. In this new setting, the Templar ideal was reborn, detached from crusade and bound instead to personal morality and Enlightenment thought. The 18th century turned the story into legend. Histories of chivalry were popular among the educated classes, and the Templars featured prominently. Writers described them as guardians of a lost wisdom, keepers of documents hidden from both kings and popes. Secret archives, buried treasures, and underground passages filled novels and pamphlets. None were proven, yet the idea of the Templar mystery became part of European culture. During the French Revolution, the past was reinterpreted once more. Revolutionary thinkers admired the courage of Jacques de Molay and condemned the tyranny of church and monarchy that had destroyed him. Some radical groups even held ceremonies invoking his memory as a symbol of freedom. In Paris, streets near the site of his execution still bore the name Temple. 19th-century Romanticism gave the legend new life. Historians rediscovered medieval architecture, poets wrote of crusaders returning from the East, and painters filled salons with scenes of armored faith. Walter Scott's novel Ivanhoe introduced the Templar Brian de Bois Gilbert, brave, conflicted, and doomed, to a vast readership, fixing the image of the proud knight torn between passion and duty. Archaeology added fresh fascination. Excavations at former commanderies revealed stone halls, carved crosses, and traces of ancient fortifications. Scholars mapped routes of medieval pilgrims and traced the order's administrative network. The more that was learned, the more questions seemed to multiply. In the 20th century, popular culture carried the story to global audiences. Films, novels, and documentaries presented the Templars as keepers of the Holy Grail, guardians of secret bloodlines, or precursors of hidden societies. Each version reflected contemporary desires for mystery and moral clarity. The historical order remained distant, but its image adapted easily to modern storytelling. Meanwhile, serious historians continued quieter work. They examined surviving charters, account books, and trial records, reconstructing the daily reality behind the myths. What emerged was less romantic but more human, an organization of disciplined men who combined faith, administration, and warfare with remarkable skill, shaped and undone by the forces of their age. The sites they left behind still speak of that balance between devotion and structure. At Tomar in Portugal, the round church built by Templars in the 12th century still stands, its walls painted with images of apostles and knights. In London, the Temple Church retains the effigies of early crusaders lying in stone repose. Visitors often remark on the silence inside, a calm that seems older than the city around it. Modern orders claiming Templar heritage continue ceremonial traditions. Some focus on charity and historical preservation, others maintain symbolic rituals inspired by medieval vows. None can claim direct descent, yet each reflects the enduring appeal of a brotherhood defined by service and secrecy. In scholarship, the Templars have become a case study in how institutions rise and fall. Their growth illustrates the power of organization, their collapse, the vulnerability of independence in the face of politics. Their story bridges two worlds, the medieval and the modern, and continues to invite reflection on the tension between ideal and authority. Today, when travelers walk through the ruins of their castles or read the faded letters of their commanders, they encounter not only history but memory layered by centuries of retelling. The truth is simpler and perhaps more moving than legend, a community of men who believed they could serve God through discipline, who built with care, fought with resolve, and perished through the ambitions of others. Their red cross remains one of the most recognized symbols in the world. It stands on museums, churches, and coats of arms, sometimes misunderstood, always remembered. The order that began with 9 knights on a dusty road to Jerusalem has become part of humanity's shared imagination, half fact, half dream. 7 centuries have passed since the Knights Templar disappeared from history's official record. Yet their story remains one of the most carefully examined and persistently retold episodes of the Middle Ages. Every generation has returned to the same question: how could an order so disciplined, so respected, and so powerful vanish in a single decade? Modern research provides answers more human than mysterious. Documents from the papal registers, letters from royal chanceries, and inventories from seized commanderies reveal the daily texture of their existence. They show a military-religious corporation built on rules, hierarchy, and trust. Their strengths, loyalty to the Pope, independence from kings, efficiency in finance, became liabilities when those same kings sought control. Historians describe their fall as the product of coincidence rather than conspiracy. The loss of the Holy Land removed their purpose. Economic hardship pushed monarchs toward confiscation. A politically dependent papacy lacked the will to resist. The charges of heresy, when tested against surviving evidence, collapse into fabrications extracted by force. No idols, no secret rites, no forbidden doctrines have been found, only routine papers of an order doing its work. Their administrative genius influenced later institutions. Techniques of accounting, the use of sealed letters of credit, and the structure of regional command were adopted by secular governments. Their castles set new standards of design, combining religious space and military defense. Even their uniform code of discipline foreshadowed professional armies of later centuries. Archaeological study continues to refine the picture. Excavations at former sites, from Atlit in Israel to Temple Brewer in England, reveal identical patterns of planning: chapel, refectory, dormitory, and stables arranged around a courtyard. The consistency demonstrates how thoroughly they standardized life wherever they settled. Objects recovered, coins, pottery, fragments of harness, belong not to myth but to daily routine. What survives most clearly is their ideal of disciplined service. The Templar rule expected obedience not because of hierarchy alone, but because order itself was considered a form of prayer. To work honestly, to keep accounts accurately, to fight without hatred, these acts were expressions of faith. In that sense, their spiritual legacy endures far beyond the medieval church. The transformation of their memory into legend illustrates how societies use the past. When the historical framework fades, imagination fills the space. For centuries, writers projected their own concerns onto the Templars, Renaissance humanists seeking ancient wisdom, Enlightenment thinkers opposing tyranny, modern novelists searching for mystery in the ruins of certainty. Each version tells more about its era than about the 12th century itself. Yet the persistence of the legend shows the enduring appeal of ideals that once animated the real order. Discipline, unity, trust, and the pursuit of purpose larger than the individual, these qualities outlast context. To imagine the Templars is to imagine the possibility of integrity under pressure. In archives across Europe, small traces remain. A seal impressed on wax, a note of payment signed with the cross, a list of horses issued from a commandery stable. Such fragments, ordinary yet precise, speak more honestly than legend. They show that the men behind the myth were administrators and soldiers, not sorcerers or conspirators. Their world was practical, governed by calendars, weather, and obligation. The end of the order did not end the traditions it represented. In Portugal and Spain, successor orders continued charitable work. In later centuries, institutions modeled on the crusading vows supported hospitals, education, and exploration. Even secular organizations borrowed their symbols to express continuity with a disciplined moral past. Today the study of the Templars lies at the intersection of history, archaeology, and cultural memory. Their archives are among the most thoroughly analyzed in medieval scholarship. Conferences, journals, and digital catalogues continue to expand the picture of a movement once reduced to myth. Through that work, the human scale of their story returns, the faces behind the armor, the letters behind the rumors. Their influence can be traced in language as well. The word the Templar has entered modern vocabulary as shorthand for loyalty, secrecy, or lost honor. It appears in fiction, architecture, and even modern organizations that borrow the name for moral symbolism. Few medieval institutions have left such a durable imprint on collective imagination. Seen from distance, their history forms a complete arc, a humble beginning in poverty, expansion through faith and discipline, transformation into wealth and influence, and destruction through politics. It is the cycle by which many human institutions rise and fall. The Templars endure in memory because their story reflects both the aspiration and the fragility of organized idealism. If one walks today among the ruins of their castles, there is no sense of grandeur, only quiet precision. Steps worn by centuries lead upward to empty battlements. From those heights the view stretches across fields that once supplied their tables, roads once guarded by their patrols. The landscape is peaceful now, but the geometry of the stones still carries intention. Every wall, every arch, was built to endure both time and purpose. The same discipline that shaped those stones shaped their memory. Records were kept so carefully that, centuries later, historians could trace their lives day by day. In this sense, they succeeded in their vow of permanence, not through immortality of wealth or power, but through the clarity of documentation and structure. Looking back, the Templars can be understood not as a secret order but as an early experiment in international organization. They created a network of communication, standardized training, and global logistics at a time when most kingdoms barely managed their borders. Their achievement lay in administration as much as in arms. Their failure, conversely, came from success unbalanced by adaptation. When the world around them changed, they could not redefine their mission quickly enough. The virtues that once protected them, autonomy and secrecy, became reasons for suspicion. That pattern, repeated in many forms through history, makes their story perpetually relevant. In the end, what remains is not treasure or bloodline, but example. The idea that integrity can exist within discipline, that courage can coexist with humility, that faith, religious or secular, requires structure to survive. These lessons, simple and enduring, outlive both myth and monument. From a handful of knights on the road to Jerusalem to a symbol recognized across the world, their journey spans nearly a millennium of interpretation. History, stripped of legend, shows them as human beings working within their time. Memory, shaped by imagination, transforms them into timeless figures. Together, they form a mirror in which every age sees what it wishes to believe about duty, faith, and loss.